We've been looking together at the story of Gideon, and have seen as we've done that, Gideon developing in many ways in his walk with God and accepting the challenge that God lays before him. At the end of chapter 6, though, we found Gideon putting fleeces on the ground, wanting reassurance that God was going to be with him in all that lay ahead, almost in a sense asking that God would hold his hand, that he would know that he wasn't on his own. Immediately after that, though, we find Gideon picking up the challenge that God is giving him and taking his army to the very threshold of the battle that they're to engage in. And so with the start of chapter 7, Gideon and his troops stand ready for battle, only a few miles away from where the enemy are. Gideon has embraced the challenge and is ready to go. Him and his 35,000 soldiers ready to go into battle. Little does Gideon know that that whole picture is to change before the battle commences. In many ways, it seems God increases the pressure, and the question is, will he trust God? Take some time to read what happens in chapter 7, from verses 1 to 8 in Judges chapter 7. We left that question, God increases the pressure, will he trust God? And the answer is yes, he does. Whittles down the number in his army from 35,000 to 300. Less than 1 in 100 of those who start actually go forward. And we discover as we read that section that it is more than about getting a job done. Actually, this whole thing is not just for Gideon but for others a learning experience, something that will refocus them on God and on the way that they can trust God in all things and in all circumstances. God is teaching them to trust him. It's not just about making sure that the Midianites are not there and attacking them any longer, but that their trust in God would grow through all that happens. Here are some questions just now for you to look at together. Are the challenges for you increasing or size, or becoming easier with time? As you look at your life, if you're like Gideon, does it seem that no sooner is one challenge over than a fresh one emerges? Or is it becoming easier? Secondly, Gideon is learning through this that he can trust God. What would you say God is trying to teach you just now? What can you discern? And then finally, Gideon grows through a combination of time with God, that's in the fleeces, and getting on with what God has called him to do. It's those two things side by side that help him grow in his journey with God. Which helps you grow most? That time apart with God, or the getting on with what God has called you to do? Which helps you grow most, and why? We said that Gideon is learning through this that he can trust in God. That remarkable story of 35,000 taken down to 300 and Gideon ready to go with that. The Lord said to Gideon, the men you have are too many for me to give them victory over the Midianites. They might think that they have won by themselves and so give me no credit. Gideon is learning that he can trust God. Alongside that, though, he is also learning that God is not going to do it all for them. There is a responsibility that lies upon Gideon and the 300 men who are with him. God is not going to do it all for them. It's not going to be a bolt of lightning that kills all the Midianites, but they have a part to play in this. And so in verse 7, the Lord said to Gideon, I will rescue you and give you victory over the Midianites with the 300 men who lacked the water. Tell everyone else to go home. And Gideon is ready to do that. He tells the others to go. And as we will discover as we go on, so the victory is won. But there is a challenge for them in this. They are being called to go. There is a part for them to play. So often, I guess I say that in life there is a balance, and it would seem in this there is a balance as well, isn't there? A balance between expecting God to sort it out, that we can sit back and do nothing, God will just sort it out. Or at the other extreme, thinking it's all down to us, down to what we do, that there is no part that God plays, that it is simply what we do. And it seems to me that catching that balance right is important, that we understand that both of these things are needed, our part and yet our reliance upon God. And that is what Gideon was learning. He could trust God, and yet God was going to involve him in what was going on. Not as if God needed to, but God was choosing to. And the question then is, how do we keep that balance right? Between perhaps thinking too much it's down to us, or too much sitting back and thinking there's nothing that we need to do. How do we keep that balance right? As I was preparing for this, there's a wee post-it note on the bottom of my screen for my computer. It simply says Lord's Prayer. I've agreed with the men's group, we've all agreed times that we will say the Lord's Prayer, and so for me, the time I say the Lord's Prayer is when I switch my computer on each day. Won't be the same time each day, but when I do that, I say the Lord's Prayer. I've discovered for me that that has helped me to keep a balance. A balance in my expectation of what God is calling me to do, and also my holding on to God for what God will do. And so for me, that has become something that helps to keep the balance right. I wonder what it is for you. We're going to spend some time exploring some of these questions just now. First of all, which side of the balance is likely to get skewed for you? Are you more likely to sit back and expect God to sort things out without you? Or are you more likely to think it's all down to you and not rely on God in the middle of that? Secondly, that question that I was asking, what do you do to keep the balance right? What helps you so that the balance is right between those two things? And finally, for this section, what does life look like or feel like when you get the balance wrong? Take some time to explore those questions now. One of the things that is striking in this story is the way that Gideon senses and knows what God is saying. That God is telling him to allow the folk, the men, to go back who don't really want to engage in battle. How he knows when they go down to the water that God is choosing the 300 to lap the water in their hands. The Bible doesn't tell us exactly how Gideon knew those things, and yet it seems that he knew what God was saying. It's a remarkable change, isn't it, from the fleeces on the ground. He seems to know what God is saying. The other thing is the way that others recognise that and allow him to exercise leadership. There seems in a very short time to have been a trust that emerged in Gideon. They trust what he's saying and they are willing to go with it. There doesn't seem to have been a question mark over why he's let some go, or whether when it comes to lapping the water that the majority don't get chosen but simply the 300. They seem to have learnt to trust him. So what is it about those things? First of all, the first thing is something that grows for him. That sensing and knowing what God is saying is something that grows. The appearance of the angel at the start of the story, when the call comes to Gideon, is a one-off. He doesn't get an angel every time there's a decision to be made. That's not the way that things happen for him. It would seem that he has to work at this, as we all do. All of us have to work at this. How do we discern what God is saying? And for us, as we go on in life, as we learn to do that over time, then we learn to look for those things that God is doing or saying, or the signs that he's giving us. How do we begin to do that? And where are you in that discernment process? Over that second thing, the way that others recognise that in him and allow him to exercise leadership, that is something, it seems to me, that grows on him. It's something that he seems to grow into. And people recognise that emerging in Gideon's life. He emerges as a leader. But not just because he takes on that leadership responsibility, but because others recognise that and give him that role as their leader. They begin to look to him and allow him to exercise leadership. And so the question is, how do we begin to recognise that in people today? How do we encourage leadership in others? Some questions then in your final section. First of all, has it got easier for you to discern what God is saying as time goes on? Is it down to that experience of once you've done it once, it becomes easier the second, the third, the fourth time? Secondly, what has helped you to get better at hearing what God is saying? Even if you're saying it's still difficult, what has helped you to get better at hearing what God is saying? And then finally, that leadership question. The leadership role grows in Gideon. People recognise him as their leader. How can we help to nurture and grow future leaders? Take some time with these questions.